transplant, you've spent 40 years healing others. You're an expert. You know the meridian lines, the emotional triggers, the biology, and then you get the diagnosis yourself. Stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer. And suddenly, the theory isn't theory anymore. It's a Tuesday, and you're staring at your own mortality.
That's the nightmare scenario, but it's also the classic wounded healer archetype, isn't it? The idea that you can't really guide someone through the dark until you've been there yourself.
Exactly. But today we're looking at what happens after the survival. We're talking about Dr. Robin Tim So. He didn't just survive, he turned that experience into a coaching practice. But his second year, what he calls his year of successful development, wasn't about a victory lap. It was about confronting the brutal, messy reality of trying to save people who, consciously or subconsciously, might be ready to leave.
And that is a heavy topic. We are looking at a recent conversation he had with Teresa Shantz on the TNT Spirit Works podcast. And what struck me immediately was that he wasn't talking about medical protocols. He was talking about the psychology of the exit plan, which I have to say is a controversial way to frame a terminal illness.
It is, and we're going to unpack that controversy, but we also have to talk about the energy of the year itself. Robin frames his entire development this past year through a very specific metaphor, the transition from the wood snake to the fire horse. Now, before you roll your eyes at the astrology...
I was about to say, are we doing horoscopes today?
Not exactly. Think of it less as a horoscope and more as a framework for momentum. He describes the previous phase, the wood snake, as this dormant, curled-up energy. It's introspection, it's shedding skin. But the fire horse, that is 0 to 60. It's full gallop. And for Robin, that speed brought some massive professional whiplash.
Right, because if you're galloping, things happen fast, including the losses. I want to get into the specific cases he mentioned because they sounded devastating, honestly. He talked about a client he worked with for months who passed away.
Yeah, this was a gentleman he coached weekly from August to November. And this is where the coaching distinction matters. Robin isn't their oncologist. He's there for the mind-body connection. He spent 3 hours with this man in their final session. 2 days later, the man died.
That has to be a shock to the system, especially if you're new to the specific dynamic of cancer coaching. Doctors have a certain level of clinical detachment taught in medical school, but a coach, you're in the trenches of their daily emotional life. To lose someone after that level of intimacy, how did he process that?
He viewed it as a lesson in the limits of control. He said something profound. He said, "I can't be responsible for anybody." It sounds harsh, but it's actually a survival mechanism for the healer. He realized his job wasn't just to secure remission. It was to help them navigate the transition, whether that transition was back to health or out of this life entirely. He calls it walking the fine line between the inner world and the outer world.
That concept of the fine line is fascinating. It reminds me of the research on nearing death awareness, where patients often speak in metaphors about travel or leaving just before they pass. But Robin takes it a step further. He suggests that some patients are struggling because they're clinging to the outer world when their trajectory is already inward.
And that brings us to the most difficult part of his year, the client who quit. This story really stuck with me because it highlights the psychological complexity of cancer. He had a female client who was making progress, but she had a massive block. She hadn't told her family she had cancer. Not her children, nobody.
Which statistically is rare, but not unheard of. There was a study in the Journal of Clinical Oncology that looked at disclosure, and while most people tell family immediately, there is a subset of patients who hide it to protect their children from distress, what psychologists call protective buffering. But Robin didn't see it as protective, did he?
No, he saw it as a blockage. He used this great analogy. It's like eating the biscuits but not telling anyone, even though your mouth is full. The disease is visible in the energy, in the stress, even if the words aren't said. He challenged her on it. He told her that this lack of transparency was blocking her healing process.
And she fired him.
She did. She essentially said, "I can't go forward because if I do, this secret comes out and I can't live with that." And she walked away.
That's a tough pill for a coach. You push for a breakthrough and you cause a breakdown. But I want to circle back to the phrase he used, exit plan. He suggested that for some, the cancer serves as a subconscious exit plan. Now, I have to play devil's advocate here. Isn't that dangerous territory? It sounds a lot like victim blaming, telling someone they chose their illness.
It is absolutely dangerous territory, and it's one of the most contentious debates in holistic medicine. But let's look at how Robin frames it. He's not saying you consciously decided to get a tumor on Tuesday. He's talking about deep subconscious resignation. He's observed that when people are terrified to disclose their illness, it's sometimes because the illness is serving a function for them, an escape from a life they're overwhelmed by, or a way to rest that they couldn't justify otherwise.
So he's viewing it almost like a biological expression of burnout, like the body saying, if you won't stop, I will make you stop.
Precisely, and his job, as he sees it, is to help them delete that file, to rewrite the program so that the exit plan isn't necessary anymore. But he learned this year that you can't force someone to delete the file. That's the free will aspect he kept coming back to. He said losing that client was as painful as the death of the other client because it was a loss of potential.
It's the shift from being a servant to being of service. A servant does whatever the master wants, including staying in denial. Being of service means telling the truth, even if it gets you fired. That's a bold professional evolution.
And speaking of bold, we have to talk about his upcoming trip, because this isn't just a vacation, it's a spiritual pilgrimage, but ties into this whole theme of death and legacy. He's taking his daughter to the Great Wall of China.
Right, and there was that funny bit about the rabbits.
Yes. Okay, for context, if you aren't Australian, you might not get the reference. Decades ago, there was this famous Telstra Big Pond commercial where a son asks his dad why the Great Wall was built, and the dad, who clearly has no idea, just deadpans to keep the rabbits out. Robin used to joke about that with his daughter when she was a toddler.
But the reality of the wall is much darker. We looked this up. Historians estimate that anywhere from 400,000 to 1 million people died constructing the Great Wall, particularly during the Qin dynasty. It's often called the longest cemetery on Earth.
And Robin knows that. He's planning to camp overnight in one of the watchtowers. He explicitly mentioned that he expects to be busy that night. He views himself as a conduit to help clear some of that stuck energy, those souls of soldiers and laborers who passed in trauma.
It's consistent with his worldview. If you believe you can help a cancer patient transition from the physical world to the non-physical world, then helping a trapped spirit at a historical site is just the same skill set applied to a different timeline.
Exactly. And he connects it to the terracotta warriors, too. He's visiting Xi'an, which is, interestingly, almost his daughter's name, Zion. The Terracotta Army was literally built to protect the emperor in the afterlife. It's a necropolis. So his entire holiday is actually a deep dive into the energy of death and protection.
It's heavy, but he seems incredibly light about it. He talks about galloping into this new year. It feels like he's reached a point where death doesn't scare him anymore. Maybe because he's stared down his own stage 4 diagnosis.
I think that's the key. When he says living is the direct opposite to not fearing, he means it literally. He's not functioning from a place of preservation anymore. He's functioning from a place of expansion. That's the fire horse energy he's obsessed with. It's visible, it's loud, and it's moving forward regardless of the obstacles.
And that ties back to the marketing aspect the user mentioned in the prompt. Robin isn't trying to market a cure, he's marketing a mindset. He's selling the idea that whether you live or die, you need to do it with your eyes open. You need to drop the biscuit-eating secrecy and confront the reality of your life.
Right. It's timeless marketing because it appeals to the human desire for authenticity. In a world of sanitized medical speak, here's a guy saying, look, you might die, I might die, but are we going to be honest about who we are while we're here?
There's one other thing I wanted to touch on, the implosion he warned about. He said if you don't move with the energy, you implode. You start getting bad luck. Car breaks down, phone breaks.
It's the classic Jungian idea of synchronicity, or what some call the externalization of the internal. If your internal world is stuck or resisting change, your external environment starts to glitch. Robin sees these not as random accidents, but as mirrors. If you're procrastinating on your life purpose, don't be surprised if your engine stalls.
It's a tough love approach. There are no coincidences. But for a patient feeling out of control, that can actually be empowering. It suggests that if you change your internal frequency, the external chaos might settle down.
Or at least your capacity to handle the chaos changes. And that's really the summary of his year. He started as a newborn trainee in the cancer coaching world, despite his 40 years of acupuncture. He had to learn that he couldn't save everyone. He had to learn that some people will choose their secrets over their survival. And he had to learn that his role is simply to stand on that line, that edge between life and death, and hold the light for whoever's brave enough to walk it.
And doing it all while preparing to hike the Great Wall. You have to respect the stamina.
Absolutely. It's a powerful reminder that professional development isn't just about reading new journals or attending conferences. Sometimes it's about the hard spiritual labor of sitting with the dying and learning not to look away.
Well, if you know someone who is navigating that difficult journey or a practitioner who is facing burnout from carrying that load, send this episode their way. It might just be the perspective shift they need.